Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I've been working for about 14 years on trying to build a more empathic society, and I'm here with Arthur. Would you introduce yourself, Arthur?
Arthur Ciaramicoli. I'm a clinical psychologist and the author of several books that Edwin and I have talked about over time, starting with The Power of Empathy in the year 2000, which is now in 7 or 8 languages. It was just republished in China.
Oh, cool!
And
Right.
it's coming out in South Korea next month, which is an amazing thing to me because it's 20 years old.
Yeah, it was one of the early books on empathy.
Yeah.
I remember when I first started this, working on empathy, it was like one of the first books, I came across as well. I mean, now there's like 3 rows of books, but it was one of the early ones. You've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah.
And there's also, you also did the stress solution, and that's using empathy and cognitive behavioral therapy to reduce anxiety and develop resilience. So you've been continued working on the topic of empathy, and then you have the Soulful Leaders, Success with Authenticity, Integrity, and Empathy. And what we're here to talk about is your most recent book, which is The Triumph of Diversity. And while it doesn't have empathy in the title or in the subtitle, there's a lot in there about the importance of empathy.
Yes, because empathy is really, I think, the heart of diversity, Edwin.
Well, how'd you get started with writing a book on diversity? I mean, kind of shifting to this interest and topic.
Well, I've been very, very concerned about the increase in prejudice in our country, and the rates of prejudice and hate crimes have significantly grown in the last few years. And this book is really a sequel to The Soulful Leader, because in The Soulful Leader, I was very concerned about leadership politically in the corporate world, and the number of toxic leaders in our society. And this book, Diversity, was a sequel to that in the sense that the idea of prejudice and hate crimes, the anti-Semitism has increased so much, probably the highest it's been in many years. Not probably, it is the highest it's been in many years. Islamophobia has increased 67% in the last year, in 1 year. And race relations are at an all-time poor. The amount of difficulties women are finding in the corporate world, 42% of women are saying that they experience prejudice on a daily basis. So I'm just very concerned about the direction of our country, that we seem to be in an us-them time, where rather than bringing people together as you do with empathy circles, and we have a chapter on empathy circles in the book.
Chapter 13.
And obviously, I'm a great admirer of your work, because you've reached out to so many people throughout the country and many organizations. But I'm just very concerned about where we're going, and that the amount of prejudice and the amount of us-them groupthink has really expanded significantly. And I wrote this book to help people learn how to decrease discrimination, to decrease their prejudice, to slow down and use empathy, to see beyond the surface, to see in the heart and soul of other people, so that they can find the common ground, which is much of what you do in your work.
Yeah, and I looked up what is prejudice. So prejudice was preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. So it's just kind of judging people, seeing the sort of the surface and not going into the depths.
Yes. I mean, we know from credible research that when we see unfamiliar faces, we kind of recoil a bit. But what I'm trying to teach in this book, and of course throughout my work with empathy, is to move beyond that, to not, as you begin to move back because you see somebody who looks somewhat unfamiliar, move forward instead of moving back, to try to understand who they are, and don't make assumptions. In the book, as you know, I go over the idea of not making assumptions, not generalizing, not demonizing, and not ever believing that one person represents any ethnicity or any religion or any race. That we have to see people as unique, and of course that's where empathy leads us, to the unique understanding of another.
So do you think like politically one side is more prejudiced than the other, or do you think it's kind of even, or how do you kind of feel about that?
I think that both sides can be extreme, And you know, there's an interesting study that I included in the book where people were given functional MRIs, you know, diehard Republicans, diehard Democrats, and independents. And the independents showed most cognitive flexibility. And they also displayed more ability to follow the facts and not be sort of biased on one side or the other. So do I think one side is worse than the other? Not necessarily. I think both can be extreme. I think the news media is really dangerous at this point because it's very confusing of where we get the facts. Even thinking of COVID now, I mean, we're in an anti-science environment where we don't want to, so many people are anti-science and don't want to listen to the scientists and rather listen to the politicians who are telling us what to do in this very disturbing time.
Yeah, well, I can just maybe share my political journey a little bit to give a little context there. I grew up evangelical Christian, you know, sort of a fundamentalist, conservative background, did a lot of travel, you know, spent 10 years after high school travel, which, you know, sort of really quite changed me, I'd say. And I would say I sort of moved more into the progressive political, you know, side of the spectrum. But recently, you know, once Trump got elected and there was these demonstrations from the political right coming to like Berkeley, and then there would be the counter demonstrators, and then, you know, be kind of the left, and, you know, all the way, the whole spectrum, all the way to Antifa. And I tried to do these empathy circles, empathic listening between the sides. And I just really realized that both, there's a lack of empathy on all sides. It's not like, you know, kind of the self-righteousness of progressivism kind of dropped away. And I realized, wow, even kind of middle class, you know, leftists are, you know, they've got their self-righteousness, they've got their judgment, as well as the spectrum. So I've kind of, you know, left the political right or the left, and now I just say I'm for empathy.
Yes, yes. Well, me too. I think that what I try to teach and what we need to do is to focus on the facts, focus on being objective, and not making determinations based on our old conditioning or what we listened to early in life. You know, as I pointed out in the book, I mean, when I grew up, I was told that Italians are in the mafia, Irish were drunks, the Jews were cheap, the blacks were lazy, on and on, gays were going to hell, atheists were terrible people. And, you know, I had to learn, obviously, by the time I was graduated from high school, I knew none of that was true. But I heard it all early on. And when we hear things early on from the people who are so significant to us, we tend to believe them without examining them. Our role and our responsibility, I think, as adults is to re-examine the novel we wrote about ourselves and others and make it a nonfiction book. I mean, I think we grew up with distorted ideas about ourselves too because of what we've been told or how we were perceived early on that may have been inaccurate. But my work throughout my career has been to help people reduce prejudice against themselves and others. And right now we're in a prejudicial society. I mean, we are in a time where we're not bringing people together. We are divided and we're angry with each other. You know, as you said, that righteous indignation, like I know the right way and you don't. So I don't like you. I hate you. Rather than why won't we unite together? Even now in the midst of COVID, we're divided. You know, you turn on one news station and they're saying, don't wear a mask. We don't need to wear a mask. The Democrats are all doing this to make people to, you know, stop rallies and stop the conventions and so forth. And then the liberals are on the other side saying, you know, the Republicans don't care about human life. And of course, that's not true. That no one person represents a party. No one person represents a community or an ethnicity.
Yeah, it's like, but how do we do that sort of practically? Like we have the same view, the same understanding, you know, of seeing the problem, you know, of the lack of that empathy between people. But to shift the society I just see how difficult it is. I mean, all those rows of books, you know, it's something, but it doesn't seem to be enough. Even Barack Obama had empathy as sort of a core tenet of his campaign. And after he was over, he said, the one regret I have is that I wasn't able to heal the political divide. So the tools he had for creating a more empathic society, I think, weren't adequate to the job. And he himself said, he wasn't successful. And now I've seen that Biden, for example, is talking about empathy. He's been quoted quite, a bit about saying he has empathy. Empathy is important. When he gets his endorsements, like from Obama, from Hillary Clinton, from a bunch of others, they address him saying that he has a lot of empathy. But I'm a little skeptical now after seeing what happened with Barack Obama. It's like they can say, oh, we want empathy, we want this and that, but they don't seem to kind of have the tools or the commitment or something to really make it happen.
Well, one thing I would say is Barack Obama said he wasn't successful. I would say that he was to a certain degree. I think he did a lot in terms of race relations. I think some people who were bigoted and racist realized that a black man can be very bright and is a good leader and speaks well and is cultured and articulate. So I do think that he succeeded in certain ways. Did he change the whole society? No. But I think we were a kinder nation when he was president. I think there was some anger underneath the surface, and some people, diehard Republicans who felt that he was not conservative enough, and maybe he wasn't in certain ways. But I do think he influenced a lot of young people. Young people are the most diverse. I mean, young people are the most acceptant of differences now. So there has been something happening that maybe we haven't completely identified. I think empathy changes people. I mean, in the first example I talked about in the book, the man who said that he didn't like his former psychologist because he was Jewish, and he just couldn't articulate as to why. He just felt uncomfortable with him, and then he said, "I'm so glad that you're a Christian," and that because he saw my last name and he assumed Italian, Roman Catholic, and I said, "Well, what makes you think I'm Christian?" And then of course there was a moment of silence. He goes, "Because you're not." I said, "I didn't say I was or I am or I'm not." But we had this whole discussion about Judaism over time. I mean, it was 18 months he joined one of my groups in which we practice empathy on a weekly basis. And he learned that some of the things he was taught early in life were wrong. And he was open to listening about why the Jews don't think Jesus was the Messiah. Because in their literature and in their ancient text, it says that the Messiah was going to make the world peaceful and prosperous, and everyone would be happy and there would be no wars. And of course, that's not true. So why was he open to listening to the facts? I think because he and I had an empathic exchange. And when we give and receive empathy, we know it changes brain chemistry. It produces oxytocin and serotonin, these positive brain chemicals. So I know you can do it in a group format. I know you do it in empathy circles. I just don't think we're doing enough of it in enough places. In the corporate world, the number one workshop that consultants do is on empathy. Why is that? Because people have realized, even people that are not very oriented to these kind of social skills, these what they call soft skills, they realize that empathic environments, people are more creative, they're happier, and the companies are more profitable. So even in the corporate world, they're realizing that an empathic environment produces people that want to work. They want to come and be part of this leader who's guiding them to treat other people with dignity and respect. So I do think something's happening. I see it on an individual basis. My frustration is you and I can't reach enough people. Mm-hmm. I mean, you are reaching a lot of people. I mean, you were just telling me the organizations that you're involved with, and I would just encourage you to just keep doing it, because we have to do it. It's such a critical time right now.
Yeah, it's sort of like, how do we get to that cultural levers of power, or the culture? There's a certain, like Trump has a huge megaphone, right? There's a dynamic there where a lot of people hear what's happening with the politicians, that somehow it seems like we need to be able to influence them. There was just a quote that I really liked from your book, which I think sort of addresses that. It says, if we were committed to developing empathy in our schools, and if we demanded empathy from our politicians and from leaders within the corporate world and beyond, then our society would experience the shift from exclusion and fear of differences to a deep appreciation for diversity and also diverse ideas. So that was in chapter 17. And I think the operative word there for me is demand. It's not like please, wish, request,
Yes.
it's not beg, it's demand. It's like,
Yeah.
it seems to me we need sort of a more of an assertive empathy, yeah. So, and that's what that's what I'm hearing there is sort of a demand. And, how do we do that demanding? What does that demanding look like?
Well, I think we have to continue to educate people. I think we have to continue to let people know that this is necessary, that we're born with empathy neurons because it's critical to our well-being. It makes people happier. People live longer who have empathy. A society thrives when we have empathy. We know from credible studies that societies, countries who have empathic environments, they're higher rated in terms of empathy. Their people are more agreeable. They're kinder to each other. There's less discrimination. Self-esteem is higher. We know in our schools that have higher empathy quotients, that the kids have better cognitive skills. There's less bullying. There's more safety. And in diverse schools, the kids grow up learning that color, ethnicity doesn't matter very much. If you're a good friend, you're a good friend. It doesn't matter whether you're white, yellow, or black. And it doesn't matter what religion you are. So we know that this works. There's no question about it. Credible science. When I wrote The Power of Empathy, there was really no science. Not that I was aware of, but now we know empathy changes brain chemistry. It makes you feel better, and it makes us live longer and healthier. It increases well-being. And in the corporate world, the hook for people in the corporate world, some who only care about money, is it increases profits. So once you tell them that, they want to talk to you more. It works. It's fundamental, and we need it because right now we don't have a lot of it in leaders.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying you need to make the case for it, and you just laid out, quite a bit of the case for why is this good for well-being, and so, in terms of how do we spread empathy, bring it into the different aspects of the culture, is first to start with building the case for it and say this is going to help with our well-being is kind of what I'm hearing.
Yes, you and I are spreading it at the moment, because if 2 people listen to this interview, or 5 people, or 10 people, and they realize maybe for the first time that this is not a soft skill, it's a critical skill. It's needed in our environment. It's needed in our relationships. It's needed in our country, in our communities, in our schools, in our politicians, because nations who are rated as having higher levels of empathy do better. And individuals, human beings, thrive on empathic interchanges. They thrive on empathic listening.
I do want to make one footnote here about the study that you mentioned about the rating of the countries. I thought that was a pretty, in terms of the countries and their empathy levels. And the study I kind of was skeptical about, because it rated Saudi Arabia as number 2 in empathy. And I think a country that's authoritarian, cuts people's heads off, murders, journalists, has women veiled. It really had some questions about that as the study. I don't know if you're knowing that study. It was, I can't remember the author's name.
And what Arabs would tell you is that you're talking about the leadership. The study is talking about the people. And it's the empathy of the people to each other, that they're a close-knit group and they stay together, they help each other, they foster connection, they care about each other. It's a tight-knit, close group of people. They don't love the leadership. It's just like, I have a number of patients from other countries, and they say, I can't believe I'm so disappointed in Americans that you're like, and they'll talk about the government and the politicians. That's not how the average American acts. The average American isn't sadistic, doesn't criticize and call other people names. That's not who we are. That happens to be some people in power. So in Saudi Arabia, yes, the people in power act that way, but how many people know the people who are working in the streets, or the farmers, or, you know, who are they? What are they like?
Yeah. Well, I know that aspect. I've thought about it too, because I lived in Indonesia for a couple of years, and people were extremely friendly, but yet when they had an attempted coup there, and it was like, you know, anywhere from 600,000 to well over, you know, 1,200, I mean, 1,200,000 people were killed, you know, in this. So it does make me sort of wonder about this quality of sort of what looks like friendship or care within a society, and then how things can really sort of blow apart, and sort of the level of empathy within a society. So it kind of opens a whole, you know, kind of a question, you know, I mean, it's a whole thing to sort of explore. I didn't want to go too deep into it here, but it's just something I've been thinking about too. So, and I guess because that sort of relates to Saudi Arabia and the leadership, that if the society was so empathic, it doesn't seem to me that they would allow a leadership that's so authoritarian and so suppressive to happen, you know, in the sense that that the women can't drive, etc., you know. So, and that's kind of throughout the society, you know, because you're not hearing the voice of the women. Their voice is like covered up. So, yeah.
You know, I think of it with Iran too, because I interviewed one of the psychologists from Iran who now works in California. I mentioned him in the book, and he said the same thing about the Iranian people. He said one of the things Americans don't understand is we're not the leadership, but the leadership has been in power for so long, very similar to Saudi Arabia, that it's so difficult to change it.
Mm-hmm.
One of my Iranian friends told me, he said that, you know, the only time this is going to change is when these leaders get into their 80s and 90s and die. That's how difficult it is to change the people that are ruling the country. And I don't consider myself politically astute, so I may not understand all of that, but I believe what he's saying, that this has gone on for so long, thousands of years, that people have led this way, that it's very difficult for the common person to unite against that kind of power, leadership, and wealth.
Well, that's kind of what I'm looking at. How do we do that, at least here in the United States? But I did also want to look at kind of what you were saying about diversity. So you're connecting empathy and diversity. You know, you've looked at empathy from a lot of different viewpoints, you know, from the stress factor, from leadership, and now you're kind of making the connection to diversity. And so what other sort of insights do you have about you know, diversity and, you know, versus, you know, prejudice and empathy?
Well, I think when people accept diversity, that it's a positive thing, that a diverse group of people brings diverse ideas. Think of a group of one of my patients who's in marketing said, you know, if you take 10 white 50-year-old men in a group and you try to decide what products to bring to market, it's like that, you know, you're preaching to the choir. You don't come up with much creativity. If you have 10 people in a group and that there's 5 women, 5 men, some are one African American, another is from Ireland, somebody's from England, someone's Jewish, someone's an atheist, but maybe someone else is Muslim. He said, you look at the whole world. We've seen this over and over again, that the expanse of ideas is incredible, and it makes for better products because you really are speaking to the world, you're selling to the world. But also, you know, the diversity, it enriches the mind, and it soothes, it enlivens our soul, because here we are learning so much from people that we have little exposure to. Now we're having more exposure to people that are not just like us. It's like, you know, in Massachusetts, for instance, I have some Brazilian clients who are, you know, own restaurants, and they talk about their frustration. These 2 brothers who own a series of restaurants, their frustration with a lot of their relatives who live in this one section of Massachusetts where they only speak Portuguese and they don't go outside of that area. And he said they're so small-minded. And he's not commenting on Brazilian people in general, but he's trying to get them they watch Brazilian TV. And one of my clients who I interviewed in the book too, who's Muslim, said, you know, a lot of his Indian cousins and relatives who are here, they will only associate with other Indians. And he said, and I thought this was a profound comment, when he teaches, because he lectures to different mosques, he said, you know, you want the Americans' money, but you don't want their people. And he's trying to teach them to go out beyond themselves, to learn more about this society and others. And when we do that, I do think it raises people's spirits. The world becomes very interesting. Mm-hmm. When I meet with patients from other countries, it's like I feel like I've been there. You know what I mean? I'm learning so much about another culture, another religion. I interviewed a number of people in interfaith groups, and I just had a wonderful time there, because here I am sitting in this office with a Sikh, a Catholic priest, a Muslim, and you know, and they're all really liking each other and understanding. In fact, my Sikh friend said, he said, you know, we're all just different branches of the tree going to the same place. We're going to God. So we learn from each other, and I enjoyed interacting with that group in particular, because they come from different places, but they all learn pieces from each other. You know, the book Holy Envy that I mentioned in the book by Barbara Taylor, who, you know, talks about her envy of other religions, even though she's you know, Protestant minister, that as she learned, every one of them brought her something, although she still maintained her own foundation in Christianity. But when we keep our world small, our energy doesn't really grow. Our spirit doesn't grow, because we're limited. We're limited to what we see and what we're exposed to, and we're limited in terms of knowledge and wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's so. It's the case. It sounds like the case is for sort of innovation, right? You have you come up with different ideas. We have a variety of people. You come up with more creativity and innovation, and then there's also, I guess, like you're saying, it sounds like that you enjoy that variety of perspectives and experiences, and it sort of enriches your life.
Yes.
Yeah. I know that's what happened to me is, you know, I did that travel that I was mentioning. And so I traveled around the world for 10 years, you know, I was in doing did odd jobs around the world. I was in New Zealand, then Australia and Indonesia and the Philippines, and all throughout Asia, Europe, eventually China and Russia, and just, wow, you know, traveled all over the place. And that was, I think, the thing that really, it's that diversity of living in all those diverse environments, I think, that really sort of shifted my view, just to see sort of that common humanity, that, oh, under all these differences, people have this commonality to them. There's a common humanity of the same, you know, feelings of fear and joy and creativity and desiring connection, wanting to be seen and be understood. So I think that's really maybe what you're really addressing, you know, speaking to, is that quality.
Empathy allowing us to see that beyond the surface, we're more similar than dissimilar. Excuse me.
Yeah, and then it's, yep. And it's like, how do we do that? Like, what things can we do to sort of practically kind of spread that, you know, to kind of shift the society to value that? Because right now, you know, with you know, well, even before the, you know, the COVID and all the pandemic, it was like, well, let's close the borders, let's you know, kind of withdraw more from the society, let's, you know, kind of be critical, you know, of others. And so it's like, how do we create a, you know, a counter force, you know, to that? Yeah, so that's kind of what I kind of sit with, is like, how do we kind of practically, you know, shift the society?
I think that by your use and creation of empathy circles, you're doing that, because you bring people together and you allow them through empathy to slow down and truly listen to each other. And I think that's what we have to do. I mean, we are a very fast-paced society. In my leadership and communication groups, eventually people become calmer and they listen to each other. And my job, and others too, as I've been there for a while, is to point out when we're distorting things, when we're not seeing the truth about ourselves or others. And their empathic skills just grow and grow. Their range of empathy grows, and they become happier. They become more fulfilled because they're actually seeing the truth, not living in a distorted world, which doesn't make people very healthy. But you're asking critical questions. That's why I wrote this book and I wrote the Soulful Leader, is because I felt like I had to do something. I wish I could reach more people.
Mm-hmm.
I know you do too. We can only see so many people, but we're a little ripple in the water, and we're hoping that it continues to spread and spread. I believe most people want to live an empathic, compassionate life. I think that most people are good, that we have goodness within us. Sometimes it takes a while to uncover it in certain people because of their conditioning and their righteousness, as you said earlier. But usually it happens if they're willing to be exposed to the possibility that maybe they're not right. This concept of deliberate polling, where you bring people together on opposite sides, it's similar to empathy circles in a way, but they bring in experts, whether it's climate change or whatever the subject is, and they just ask people to slow down, listen to these 2 or 3 experts, and let's decide what the objective facts are. Very similar to, you don't need to wear a mask with COVID. Well, if we were sitting with a group of 20 people, we'd have 4 scientists in front of us say, well, what are the facts in terms of masks? Should we wear them or not? And don't try to prejudge, try to listen to the facts. We've done some studies. It's trying to teach people to not just take in what they hear, but actually use empathy to slow down and assess what you hear. Because everything you hear is not the truth about any one group or another. Have faith in yourself and with others who are slowing down and listening empathically to find out what the objective truth is. And I think once people get involved in that process, they take to it.
Yeah. Well, that takes time. It's fast paced. People are in a hurry. They want to get entertained. Being able to sit down, like in your groups, you mentioned you have groups that have gone on for like decades, I believe, and they're in dialogue with each other, talking about deeper experiences that they have. And it takes time to have those dialogues to see under the surface. I don't know, there's one thing that you'd mentioned, the climate, that a group I've started working with is Extinction Rebellion. I don't know if you've heard of that group, but they're an environmental group that started in the UK. And they're very activist in terms of doing sort of street actions, like they blocked, 5 bridges in London, around the Parliament. They've occupied plazas there, and it's spread around the world. So it's in like cities, countries all around the world. And one of their demands is what they call a citizens' assembly for addressing climate change. So that is sort of like a jury. They do it through sortition. They call it sortition. You bring a group of maybe a couple hundred people together from all walks of life. They're randomly selected. And then they spend actually a couple months together, bring in the politicians, like you're talking, not the politicians, they bring in the experts, and they have those dialogues. It's exactly what you're talking about, but there's a whole sort of a process called citizens assemblies, where they have these type of dialogues in a different way than, the political parties. Instead of that structure, it's kind of bringing the citizens together and, sort of like a jury, and then they actually make policy, and it's much more democratic. So that's actually the third demand that they have, is we want a citizens assembly on what do we do about climate change. So it's very much, and actually that group, we've been doing a lot of work with them with empathy, and it's sort of spreading within that movement, the empathy circle practice. We've been doing trainings with them, and I see it sort of as a stepping stone to occupying the Capitol Mall, if once this COVID is over, we'll take the empathy tents, we'll occupy the Capitol Mall, and we will demand that the left and the right, the Republicans and the Democrats, have empathy circles with each other, and we're not leaving until they do, and are also willing to be arrested. So I think that's sort of the demand that you talk about. We demand that politicians. It's not like, hey, we demand it. It's just words. It's like we're putting ourselves on the line, a la nonviolent direct action, King and Gandhi, that it's going to need that level of commitment to bring this culture of empathy to the fore, I think. Because otherwise people don't take us seriously. It's like, oh, those guys, they're just doing their workshops. They're just, saying this. They're not willing to put their lives on the line, sort of. So I don't know, that's a long speech there, but just that's kind of where I'm kind of going.
I know I can feel that your passion is you want to have a larger impact, and you know that we have to influence the people at the top, and maybe it would take that. Because you're right. I mean, we're doing something on a smaller level, and we're hoping to get to the leaders who have the power to have great influence and great impact. And right now we don't have that.
Yeah.
And we know that. And I listen to people all week, and in my practice and in my life, and most people want leaders of a different nature. And if you ask most people if they want someone who's empathic, who can understand and listen and become that and exude those kind of characteristics with good character. Joe Biden, one of Biden's slogans that I wish he would keep repeating is "Make America Moral Again," and bring back character and make character and integrity more important than status and image. Because we've gone too far that way. I mean, many people have said that we're materially rich but spiritually poor.
Well, maybe it's time you and I ran for office. It's like we will start the empathy,
you
the empathy
president,
party.
I'll be vice president.
Oh, we can go for Congress. I don't know. President's pretty tough,
are you entertaining that?
I had thought of it. That it does seem to be a route to go to. Even if you don't win, you still use the mechanism of the political system for fundraising, for educating the public. You get on the stage, for the discussions or debates. The policy would be is like all the volunteers would be doing empathy circles, and they would offer empathy circles, and they would also try to reach out to whoever the other side is to do empathy circles. So it's to use that whole political machinery to promote, an empathic mindset. So it seems to me, even if, we didn't win, we'd still win just by the message, so.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's probably true, because you would you'd be on a podium.
Yeah.
And you have many listeners, and that's part of the problem, getting more people to listen and be exposed to this and the benefits of empathy and diversity. And because the benefits are profound, but many people don't know that.
And you articulate them so beautifully. I mean, it's like people like you who can say the benefits right off the bat, and everybody has that has studied it so deeply. So, with the insights that you have, that you can make the case on a stage, right? You could articulate the case for a more empathic society, to the larger public. So yeah, I think you should run too. We should both run.
Maybe we should make a documentary and then somehow get it in the hands of certain politicians.
That too, yeah. I mean, you've made the case. I mean, you've done a beautiful job of, laying out the case and the benefits and, in so many different contexts. So a documentary, running for office. We had our local candidates running for the state assembly here in California. There was 11 candidates, and I invited them to an empathy, we call it the Radical Empathy Forum. And it was at UC Berkeley. We had a hall there, worked together with some students, set it up. we had 11 candidates do 2 empathy circles with each other. So they were doing empathic listening. And the topic was, how do we create a more empathic society? And there's video too. There's video on my website for that. So, they were, as candidates, they were willing to bring it up, talk about it. And you really learned a lot about the candidates to see how good could they really listen and do empathic listening. I mean, it really told you a lot about their kind of who they were, I felt. And yeah.
So that would be an advantage to the public to hear how they listen, how they process information.
Yeah. And then we could hold kind of encounter groups in the White House and empathy circles. I'm serious about this. I am dead serious. I'm not joking, because I'm working with the Extinction Rebellion. They do this kind of stuff. The Extinction Rebellion occupied the street in front of the Times, New York Times. They arrested, 20 people. The Extinction Rebellion had the biggest demonstrations and people on the street in the history of the UK. And the most people arrested for civil rights, whatever. They didn't have civil rights, but women's suffrage. So they had the most people actually willing to be arrested. And there's, it's a lot of young people who are really seeing, hey, we're heading off a cliff with climate change. And, my life's going to be affected. And, they're putting their lives or careers or, themselves on the line, willing to do that. And I think that's what it's going to take for a cultural shift. Just as if you have an authoritarian government, it's not like saying, oh, please, can we kind of shift? You gotta, be on the street. I guess that's the route I'm looking, is we go to the streets with this message. It's important to have all the documentation, all the arguments in place. That's critical. But I do think that we need to go to the streets and to the political system if we really want to have this cultural shift.
Well, I think you're right. I think we have to influence the political system. In my small way, that's why I wrote these last 2 books, but and I've sent them to senators, but they probably never get them, probably never read them. So yeah, I think you're looking at this in a much larger scale of how to make a difference that's lasting and that would permeate through the whole society.
Yeah. And, I did talk to my congressman about it. We actually went to his office. We gave him a T-shirt, and, I tried to get him to do an empathy circle, and it was like, it's hard to get him to actually take the time to do it, but I keep advocating. And, you can go to your local congressional representative is, they're accessible. You can make an appointment with them and sort of make the case and say, hey, how about doing more, and the senators, they're a bit harder, at least here in California, because it's such a big state. But yeah, I don't know, have you talked to any politicians? You've sent the books that.
I've written to them, but I haven't got any responses, frankly. But maybe you're right that instead of appealing to senators, it would to talk to local representatives would you'd probably have more access. I will try that. I will pursue that as well. I write to people every day, Edwin. I write to educators, politicians, leaders in the corporate world. I Google diversity programs every day and try to reach out to people who are leading programs in the different universities. And, I have on my Google search, empathy, diversity, compassion. So whenever I come across anyone that's doing work in that area, I write to them, see if I can reach out. But, it's slow going.
Yeah.
I have full-time practice, so I'm seeing patients on the hour, and I have my groups, and I try to do this in between, early in the morning, later at night, weekends. I'm always trying to reach more people.
Yeah, but you've got the experience. That's what, see, a lot of the politicians, they haven't done that group work and that group practice. And that's what I admire about, Carl Rogers. He spent the, 40 years listening to people, right? He was he did the science, but he also just did the practice too. And I mean, you've got that personal experience of leading those groups and listening to clients, and it's that practical experience.
The group experience has been the most rewarding of my life in terms of my, as a clinician, because you bring people together who are from different walks of life, different cultures, some different races. And in the end, it's the people who are esteemed the most, who get the most respect in the group, are the most empathic. And time and time again, I have, particularly men, I'll get a referral and someone will say, this person will never make it in one of your groups. He doesn't have the empathy gene. And then when they leave, they uncovered it. Lots of times I talk about, I'm not there to find out what's wrong with you. I'm trying to uncover what's always been right with you. And, for men in particular, empathy lies dormant. It goes underground because it's not seen as very masculine. But I think the culture has changed a lot in that regard. But you're right. I mean, you're opening my eyes to it's the people in power, the people that have that greater. I mean, they're in front of millions of people every day.
Yeah,
where we're influencing small groups of people, but they're influencing millions.
Yeah, how do we get Joe Biden to do an empathy circle? I sent the whole packet, like you, to Hillary Clinton after she lost the election. She wrote a bunch on, we need radical empathy. She had sort of a coming to empathy experience after losing the election, and she wrote a bunch of interesting stuff on the importance of empathy. And, I sent her a whole, packet of stuff, never heard back. I invited her to do an empathy circle. So if we could get Joe Biden and Donald Trump to do an empathy circle, I mean, we'd be in business.
That would be beyond fascinating. Yeah, I wrote to Joe Biden too, but
oh, really?
But I have not got a response. But I'm gonna follow up on your point of trying to reach out to more local politicians, and maybe there'll be more success there.
Yeah, with Joe Biden, I've kind of looked into how the political, stuff works. If we had gone to Iowa, and camped there for a month, we would have the politicians were all running around there, and they're really accessible. And I think like in New Hampshire too, isn't that near Massachusetts? Like they would go there, and you could actually sort of bird dog them, they call it, where you kind of follow them around. And I've seen people who have kind of spoken to them face to face, just at these events. Yeah. But now with the whole COVID, it really messes that up. But if you would do an empathy circle online, if we could somehow make it happen. I did go to his Facebook group. They have a Facebook group, the official Facebook group, and I posted there, and I actually tried to do an empathy circle with supporters, and couldn't get anyone. So there's other ways of maybe kind of reaching, through the volunteer organizations to kind of build up, support. So yeah, those are some of the other kind of ways, the kind of the creative ways of kind of getting this message out there, I think.
So with social media and obviously the millions of people that are on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, a conversation like this, how do we reach those people if they could even listen to this discussion?
Yeah, I post it to Facebook. I'll post this to Facebook, and then I post it to YouTube. So it'll be on those two channels, and then I promote it throughout the social media community that I have, so that gets it out. But again, it's relatively small to the millions of people that are out there, and that's why I've really kind of gotten interested in this nonviolent direct action of Extinction Rebellion, because they have gotten so much publicity by putting themselves on the streets and, you know, getting arrested and literally, I'm not kidding about, you know, setting up in front of the Capitol Mall, on the Capitol Mall. We've got empathy tents. You've probably seen the pictures of the empathy tent that I've done. So I've got all kinds of experience with street level, you know, action. And I think it's going to take something like that. It's just like, you know, Martin Luther King's, you know, civil rights. I think what we're trying to do is at that level to make a cultural shift, and it's going to take something that level to, and it's a different kind of an action that we're doing, because we're not trying to say you guys are wrong. We're trying to empathize with the politicians. We're trying to have the politicians empathize with each other.
Yes.
And I think the society, if they have that choice of, hey, these guys are really just wanting the Republicans and Democrats to have an empathy circle with each other and listen to each other, I think the public would support that, you know. And then we've got the case, you know, that you've been making, you know, laying it out, you know, really clearly, that, you know, that we've got that part in that, you know, which is a critical part. We have it in place, but we need that street. At least that's where I'm moving towards, is that street action, you know, taking it to the streets and kind of building, you know, that support now.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope to see you on the streets. Hope to see you on the Capitol Mall. We got a to-do list.
You let me know when we're supposed to be there.
Okay, and you will bring all your friends. 2, you're going to run for, you know, Congress, and you're going to take the message. Even if you lose, you know, try it. It couldn't hurt, you know, if you.
I've never thought of myself as a politician, but that would be very interesting.
Could be fun.
It certainly would be.
Yeah.
I would love to have the opportunity to influence that political circle. Would love to.
So what's the next projects you have now? I mean, another book, another project. What are you working on next? Where's your energy going?
Just sort of thinking about, I'm not sure. I'm working with a Chinese entrepreneur who's an educator in China, and he wants me to do 3 courses, one on empathy, the power of empathy, because it was just published in China, and he read it and came here and we talked. And then a second, the soulful leader, and then a third, the triumph of diversity. So that will take some time and some work. And I continue to be busy in my practice and in my groups. So I'm not sure about writing because I want to see how many people this influences. I mean, it you know, it does, like you're saying, it influences a small group of people, but it's frustrating to not get it out there to reach more people, to have more exposure. So I'd like to speak more. I'd like to speak on these topics. You can reach larger groups of people. I'm doing that. And, you know, I'm doing a podcast this weekend with an interfaith group, a local interfaith group on Zoom. And I did one a couple weeks ago, which I really enjoyed. So, you know, influencing small groups of people here and there and trying to cause that ripple that keeps moving.
And training, are you developing like a course? Is that or do you have a course, empathy training, or you're talking about in China to actually do a course, or?
It's a course on empathy, the power of empathy. And then there'll be a course on the soulful leadership. And the last part will be on diversity. And interestingly, you know, I did a podcast in China on the power of empathy, the book, The Power of Empathy, and there were 400 attendees.
Wow.
More people than would be here.
Yeah.
And this young fella has told me that the Chinese are very interested in empathy.
That happens a lot. Yeah, it's something that's, you know, your own culture that takes it for granted, and, you know, other cultures see it as something new and they're interested in it. So.
And of course, in terms of prejudice, you know, Asian Americans, I have some Chinese Americans here as patients, and they're facing a great deal of prejudice with the blaming of China for COVID. And it's just so unfortunate because these are young people who are born here. They have nothing to do with it.
Yeah, well, that training is really interesting. That's what we're I'm starting to focus on too. And the training is built around the empathy circle, that we have different topics for the empathy circle. So your books could actually be like in China, like those 400 people, it could be like, hey, you read the book and then you take part in an empathy circle of, 4 to 5 people, and you use the book as a gateway to discuss using, empathic listening. And then you do a couple of the, empathy circles, and then you go through a facilitator training. So we have a, 4 module facilitator training, and we're expanding that. So you have a little bit of didactic, 15 minutes, 20 minutes of didactic information. But then the rest, hour and a half is actually doing active listening, empathic listening, to talk about the information. So I could see that the books could be a gateway, for something like a empathy circle book club, and then you're learning those empathy circle skills.
Well, let's talk further, Edwin, about doing that here.
Okay.
With the books and empathy circles, and combining both the practical, the theoretical and the practical.
Okay, that'd be great, because we're doing that with the Extinction Rebellion, that it's actually the empathy circle practice is starting to spread throughout the Extinction Rebellion. We have, in France and Belgium and Switzerland and UK and Ireland and in Poland, Norway, there's somebody doing it there, in Australia. So it's starting to spread. There's a whole network of chapters already for Extinction Rebellion, and this is like something that speaks to that, to a certain percentage in that community that are starting to take it up. And then the other strategy is one to kind of have the training, the practice, and the other is, like we were talking about, getting the leadership to take part. And if you get the leadership to take part, then the followers are more likely they learn just by observing the practice, and then they're more open. So we've had a lot of the founders of Extinction Rebellion, take part in empathy circles. So it's sort of spreading, that way. So that's similar to what we could do here, to kind of work our way up, find institutions, and then kind of get the leadership to take part in an empathy circle and model it. And we're trying to do that in the healthcare that I was telling you about too, so yeah, well, let's talk about it offline and see what we can do around that.
Yeah, I would love to take, especially the last 2 books that I think apply a great deal to what's going on right now, and both of them, speak to empathy from many different perspectives, and dovetail that with empathy circles. I think that's great.
Yeah, sounds good. We got a plan.
Okay.
The next step. So, okay, well, great. We've gone for about an hour, so I guess it's probably a good time as any to close.
Okay.
As usual, it's great talking to you. I've interviewed you about 2 or 3 times before on each of your books. It's always a pleasure to talk and keep building this movement that we're doing.
Well, thank you very much. It's always great to talk with you, Edwin, and I admire all the work you're doing. We'll keep chipping away. And let's talk about that other possibility. I think that would be very interesting and hopefully very meaningful to more people.
Oh, and how do people get a hold of you? What's the best way? It'll be in the link below this video, but
my website is balanceyoursuccess.com.
Okay, great.